Sundays had always been the calmest part of my week. The one day I allowed myself to feel truly at peace, wrapped in the familiar comfort of our little church, its wooden pews polished by decades of faithful hands, the choir's voices lifting toward the rafters, and the pastor's sermon echoing through the hall like a balm for the soul. I had risen early that morning, dressed in my best, and walked through the brisk air with a heart ready for prayer. Yet even as the hymns swelled and neighbors greeted me with warm smiles, I could not shake an odd heaviness that clung to me like a shadow. It wasn't anything I could explain, just a persistent unease, a whisper in my chest that urged me not to linger, to excuse myself from fellowship and return home before the others. So I did something I rarely did. I left early, telling myself I would make a cup of tea, perhaps rest with a book, and let the quiet afternoon soothe me. The streets were hushed as I walked, the town almost too still, the autumn sun hanging low and golden above the roofs. By the time I reached my front door, I was comforted by the thought of home. But as soon as the key turned in the lock and the door creaked open, I knew something was wrong. The silence was heavy, unnatural, and it pressed against me the moment I stepped inside. Normally, Anna would be humming in her room. The kettle might already be whistling, or I might hear the faint notes of music drifting from the kitchen radio. But that day the house felt deserted, as if it were holding its breath. I slipped off my shoes and set down my bag, telling myself I was being silly. But then came the sound, faint, unmistakable, the low scrape of a drawer being shut in the kitchen. My breath caught, my heart stuttering in my chest, and every nerve in me screamed that someone was inside. My first thought was of Anna. Had she come home early too? But there was no music, no laughter, no cheerful mom to greet me. Swallowing hard, I moved forward on tiptoe, each step heavier than the last, the wooden floor groaning faintly under my weight. The closer I came to the kitchen, the more the air seemed to thicken, until I stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame, frozen in place by the sight before me. My daughter was there, Anna, her face pale, her body tense, standing on one side of the table, but she wasn't alone. Across from her was a man I had never seen before, tall, broad-shouldered, with a grim look that made the air feel colder. His clothes were dark, his eyes sharp and calculating, and resting on the table between them was a worn leather bag, half unzipped, something glinting faintly from within. His hand hovered just above it, as if ready to snatch it up at a moment's notice. And though he wasn't pointing a weapon, the threat in his posture was undeniable. Anna's eyes darted to me the instant I appeared, wide with panic, and her lips parted as though she wanted to speak but didn't know what to say. "Mom," she breathed, her voice so fragile, so full of fear that it made my blood run cold. The man's head turned toward me slowly, his stare cutting like a blade, and the corner of his mouth curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. In that instant, the truth slammed into me with such force I nearly staggered. I had not walked into the safety of my home after church. I had walked straight into a secret, a confrontation I was never meant to witness, something dark enough to freeze me where I stood. And though my heart raced with terror, one thought screamed louder than all the rest. My daughter was hiding something, and whatever it was, I had just stepped into the middle of it. For several agonizing seconds, none of us moved, the three of us locked in a tableau that seemed suspended outside of time, my daughter standing with her hands clenched tightly at her sides, the stranger looming with his shadow stretching across my kitchen floor, and me rooted to the doorway, every instinct in my body urging me to run, yet every ounce of love for my child chaining me firmly in place. My voice trembled when it finally broke the silence, barely more than a whisper. "Anna, what is going on here? Who is this man?" Her lips quivered, her eyes glassy with tears she fought to hold back, and she stepped toward me. But the stranger shifted slightly, his hand pressing against the worn leather bag on the table as though he was warning her, or me, not to get too close. There was no weapon visible, yet I felt a threat hanging thick in the air, as if violence was only a heartbeat away, and the way his cold eyes bored into mine sent an icy shiver crawling down my spine. "You shouldn't have come home early," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly, every syllable dripping with menace, and my breath caught at the sound of it. Anna shook her head quickly, desperation flashing across her face. "No, please don't," she started, but the man cut her off with a glance, sharp and final, silencing her with nothing more than the weight of his stare. My knees wobbled beneath me, but I forced myself to stand taller, clutching the frame so tightly I thought the wood might splinter under my fingers. "This is my home," I said, my voice shaking but louder now, more defiant, "and I want answers right now." The man's eyes narrowed, and then, almost mockingly, he looked back at Anna, as though daring her to speak, daring her to break some unspoken rule between them. She swallowed hard, her chest heaving with shallow breaths, and finally she whispered, "Mom, this is David." I blinked at the name, but it meant nothing to me, only a hollow syllable that carried no comfort. "And what is he doing in my kitchen?" I demanded, my fear starting to twist into anger, the protective fury of a mother rising to the surface. Anna's lips trembled, her words stumbling out as though they were knives cutting her tongue. "See, he's helping me." That answer only raised more questions, the most pressing of which burst from me before I could stop it. "Helping you with what?" She opened her mouth to respond, but David, if that truly was his name, finally spoke, his voice steady, almost eerily calm, like a man who had already rehearsed this conversation in his mind. "Your daughter knows too much," he said flatly, his gaze locking with mine, and the pit in my stomach twisted into something far darker. My throat tightened, and I turned to Anna, who shook her head quickly, her hands lifting in a pleading gesture. "It's not like that, Mom, please. Just listen, I can explain." But she didn't explain. Not then. Her eyes darted nervously to the bag on the table, then to the window, then back to the stranger, and I realized with a sickening jolt that whatever secret she was carrying, it was dangerous. Dangerous enough to invite a man like this into our home. Dangerous enough to keep her trembling under his watchful eye. Dangerous enough that even speaking of it seemed forbidden. The silence between us stretched unbearably, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, each beat screaming at me to protect her, to pull her into my arms and drag her away from whatever pit she had stumbled into. But I could not move. Not with that man standing so close, not with that bag on the table glinting faintly as though it held the answers I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Anna," I whispered hoarsely, "whatever this is, it ends now. You need to tell me the truth." Her lips parted, her voice breaking into a sob. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." David exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable, then leaned slightly against the table, his hands still never leaving the bag, his presence a wall between my daughter and me. "She saw something she shouldn't have seen," he said quietly, almost matter-of-factly, "and now it's too late to go back." Those words slammed into me like a physical blow, leaving me reeling, my mind spinning with possibilities. What could Anna have possibly seen that would bring this man into my home, that would leave her standing there pale and trembling, caught between fear of him and fear of losing me? My voice cracked as I demanded again, more forceful this time. "Tell me, Anna, what did you see?" Tears welled in her eyes as she turned toward me, her lips trembling on the edge of a confession that I sensed would shatter everything I thought I knew about our quiet lives. Anna's shoulders shook as she drew in a shaky breath, her eyes darting nervously between me and David, the stranger who had somehow become the epicenter of our living room, our lives suspended between fear and revelation. "Mom," I wasn't supposed to see it, she whispered, her voice almost lost in the heavy silence. I only wanted to grab some bread from the kitchen after school, and I cut through the alley behind the old warehouse. I thought it would be quicker, but then I saw them. Her words stumbled over each other, trembling under the weight of what she was trying to describe, and I instinctively took a step closer, my hand reaching out to steady her, though David's presence still held a shadow over the room, a quiet warning that I shouldn't interfere. Saw who? Saw what? I pressed, my voice barely above a whisper, my chest tightening as panic threatened to rise, but Anna's gaze fell to the floor, and she swallowed hard. There were men, lots of them, and they were carrying boxes. At first I thought it was just supplies or equipment, but then one of the boxes tipped over, and her lips trembled and tears spilled over her cheeks. It was full of guns, Mom, real guns, and they were planning to move them somewhere, and I saw it all. I froze, and that's when David saw me. She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. He made me promise not to tell anyone. I felt the blood drain from my face, my mind struggling to process the enormity of her words. Guns? In our quiet little town? In the alley behind a warehouse I had driven past countless times without thinking twice? The familiar streets of my neighborhood suddenly felt sinister, as though shadows lurked behind every corner, and the thought of my daughter stumbling into something so dangerous alone made my chest ache with guilt and fear. I turned to David, who remained motionless, his hand still hovering near the bag on the table, his jaw tight with tension. He told me to be quiet, Anna continued, her voice breaking, or they would hurt me, or you, or both of us. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to trust. I was trying to protect you. My heart clenched, tears threatening to spill as I drew her closer, holding her trembling hands, feeling the warmth of her fear, the weight of her secret pressing down on both of us. David's expression softened slightly, the hardness in his eyes giving way to something that almost looked like remorse. I warned her, he said, his voice low, because I couldn't risk her being seen. If they knew she had seen, they wouldn't hesitate. That's why I've been careful, watching, guiding, making sure she stayed out of reach until I could figure out a way to fix this without anyone getting hurt. I stared at him, my mind spinning with questions, fury, and disbelief. You brought a stranger into my house to protect her, I demanded, though the words sounded hollow in the tension-filled kitchen. Anna flinched at my tone but didn't speak, her lips pressed tightly together. Yes, David said, almost defensively, because I had no other choice. I'm trapped too. I can't leave, and if I step out of line, they'll come after me, or worse, after her. I was trying to keep both of you alive. The room was silent except for our uneven breathing, and I felt a dizzying mix of relief, horror, and outrage. Relief that she had someone looking out for her, horror at the danger that had crept into our lives so unexpectedly, and outrage at the fact that my daughter had been living under such a burden alone, believing that secrecy was her only shield. I pulled Anna close, my arms trembling, and whispered, "We'll figure this out together. No more hiding, no more fear alone. Whatever this is, we face it together." She clung to me, tears soaking my sleeves, and for the first time since walking into the kitchen, I felt a tiny spark of hope amidst the terror. But as David watched us, his expression darkening again, I realized that while we had acknowledged the truth, we were only standing at the edge of the storm. A storm that would demand courage, cleverness, and every ounce of determination we could summon if we were to survive it. And even as I tried to steady my racing heart, I knew that our quiet, safe world had been shattered, replaced with shadows that moved, threats that watched, and a secret that once revealed could change everything. The kitchen felt smaller than ever, the shadows in the corners deepening as the late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting lines across the floor that seemed to stretch like bars across our lives. I held Anna close, her sobs gradually quieting, but the weight of the secret she had carried alone pressed heavily against both of us. David shifted near the table, his eyes scanning the room as though even the walls might betray us, and finally he spoke, his voice low, urgent. "We don't have much time. They will notice she's told someone, even indirectly. If they suspect we are planning anything, it won't be long before they come for her, for both of you." I felt my chest tighten, a mix of fear and frustration swirling inside me. "Then what do we do?" I demanded, though my voice was steadier than I expected. "Do we call the police? Do we run?" David shook his head slowly. "No! Some of them have influence. Local authorities can't be trusted. Any misstep and it'll be worse. We have to be smart. We have to gather evidence, photos, recordings, something that proves their operations without tipping them off. It's risky, but it's the only way you'll be safe." I stared at him, my mind racing. Evidence? Risk? Guns? Smuggling? This was no longer just a momentary shock. It was a life-or-death labyrinth, and somehow my daughter and I were trapped inside it. Anna wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve and whispered, "Mom, I've been trying to handle it on my own. I thought I could keep you safe if I didn't say anything, but I was scared. I didn't want you hurt." My heart clenched. The thought of my child shouldering such terror, believing her silence was protection, made my chest ache in ways I couldn't put into words. "You did the right thing by telling me," I said softly, holding her face in my hands. "We face this together now. I won't let anything happen to you." David nodded, but his gaze remained serious, shadowed with worry. "We need to plan. The next shipment is scheduled for tonight. They will move it through the same route Anna saw before, and if we can intercept it, quietly, we might get proof without being noticed. But you need to understand, one wrong move, and they'll know. They'll come for you, and no one will be able to stop them." My stomach churned, every instinct screaming to flee, to run far from this nightmare, yet the thought of leaving Anna in the hands of those men made my blood boil. "Then we plan carefully," I said, my voice firm, "and we stick together. We won't be pawns in their game." Hours passed as we whispered, strategized, and went over every possible scenario, the sun dipping below the horizon as the shadows of the kitchen lengthened, the air thick with tension. I could see the fear in Anna's eyes, but also a glimmer of determination, the same determination I felt rising in myself. David instructed us on where to hide, how to take photos without being seen, and when to make our move. Every detail was critical. Every mistake could be fatal. And as the evening deepened, I realized that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. Our home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for danger, with every creak, every flicker of light, and every whisper carrying potential peril. Yet, beneath the fear, a strange resolve settled in my chest, a fierce protective certainty. I would face whatever came next for my daughter, and together we would navigate the darkness. And when the night finally fell, heavy and black, I stood at the window watching the streets we had walked so many times, imagining the shadows that might move there, preparing myself for the confrontation that was inevitable, knowing deep down that our courage and unity would be the only shield strong enough to keep the darkness at bay. Night had fallen like a heavy curtain over the town, the streets quiet and seemingly abandoned, yet I knew better. Danger lurked in the shadows, silent, watchful, waiting for the smallest misstep. Anna and I followed David's instructions to the letter, moving like whispers through our house, every step measured, every breath controlled, hearts pounding in unison. We crept toward the alley behind the warehouse, the very place where Anna had first seen the men with the crates of guns, our nerves taut as bowstrings, the faint hum of distant traffic doing little to mask the racing of our own hearts. I held the small camera in my hands, trembling, while Anna clutched my sleeve, her eyes wide but resolute, and David led the way, scanning the darkness as though he could see the men before they even arrived. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows like empty eyes staring down at us, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. This was no longer a story we had heard of from afar. This was real, and we were in the heart of it, exposed, fragile, vulnerable. The van arrived, as David had said, sliding silently into the lot, its headlights dimmed, the men moving with practiced efficiency, unloading crates with precision and urgency. My stomach churned as I raised the camera, capturing images of the weapons, each click of the shutter echoing in the alley like a gunshot, though we had to remain invisible. One of the men paused, glancing in our direction, and my heart nearly stopped, but he returned to his work, and I realized with a shiver that luck, vigilance, and timing were all we had between life and death. We stayed crouched behind crates, watching, waiting for the right moment to retreat safely with our evidence, every second stretching into an eternity. Anna's fingers dug into my sleeve, her nails biting the fabric, but she didn't look away. She had faced fear before, yet this was unlike anything she had imagined. David whispered instructions, guiding us through a series of careful maneuvers, signaling when it was safe to move, when to freeze, when to click the shutter, just enough to gather proof without being noticed. My heart raced, my palms slick with sweat, but beneath the fear, a fierce determination settled over me. This was our moment to reclaim control, to take the shadows and threats that had invaded our lives and turn them into something tangible, something that could protect us. At last, after what felt like an eternity, the crates were fully unloaded. The men departed for a moment to check something deeper inside the warehouse, and David motioned for us to move. We slipped silently through the darkness, camera in hand, images stored and evidence secured, each step a silent prayer that we wouldn't be seen, that our presence would remain undetected. My chest ached with adrenaline and fear, yet I felt an almost surreal sense of triumph, a recognition that courage had carried us through the night, that we had acted together as a family against an invisible but lethal threat. We returned home under the shroud of darkness, the weight of what we had witnessed pressing down on us, yet a flicker of hope warming our hearts. The proof we now possessed could change everything, could protect us, could finally bring the danger into the light where it belonged. And as we reached our kitchen, quiet and dimly lit, I pulled Anna close, whispering reassurances, feeling the enormity of what we had just done, the gravity of the risk, and the relief that, at least for tonight, we had survived. But even in the quiet, I knew the storm was not over. The men would notice eventually, the threat would linger, and our lives would never be the same. Yet, for the first time since that terrifying afternoon, I felt a glimmer of power, a sense that together we could face whatever came next. And that courage, love, and careful planning might be the shield strong enough to protect us from the darkness that had once seemed unstoppable. The following days were a restless blur, the kind of anxious, sleepless hours that twist your mind and stretch time thin, as every creak of our home, every distant engine, every flicker of shadow seemed to hint at the return of danger. Anna and I moved cautiously, our routines altered, doors double-locked, windows checked multiple times a day, the quiet hum of the neighborhood now a constant reminder that even ordinary sounds could mask a threat. David kept in contact, though only sparingly, guiding us, warning us, reminding us that the men we had witnessed were still out there, watching, and that even the smallest slip could bring them down upon us before we had a chance to react. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the streets were bathed in the golden glow of dusk, a black SUV rolled slowly past our house, its windows dark, the vehicle lingering just long enough to make my stomach knot with fear before it disappeared around the corner. I froze in the hallway, heart hammering, and Anna's hand clutched mine so tightly I felt the pressure in my bones, her eyes wide with silent terror. That night, every shadow in our home seemed alive. I kept vigil at the window while Anna slept fitfully, every nerve straining for a sound, every thought racing through worst-case scenarios. And then, as if the universe itself wanted to make the danger undeniable, a letter appeared, placed deliberately on our front doorstep, scrawled in jagged handwriting. I recognized immediately. A warning, simple, cruel, and precise. Keep quiet, or next time, it won't just be a warning. My hands shook as I read it, my chest tightening with a fear I had never known before, and I felt Anna's small, cold hand on my arm, trembling as she whispered, "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't want this for you." I pulled her close, brushing back her hair, forcing a calm I did not feel, murmuring that it was not her fault, but the weight of the threat pressed on both of us like a physical presence. That night we fortified our home further, every door bolted, every window secured, yet sleep remained elusive, my eyes flicking to shadows, my mind turning every sound into a possible warning. Then, in the early hours of the next morning, I heard it, a faint scratching at the window, deliberate and slow, and when I pulled the curtain back, my blood ran cold. Crude words etched into the glass, sharp and jagged, reading simply, "Stay silent." My fingers froze on the curtain, and I realized that the danger had advanced beyond letters, beyond warnings in the dark. They had been close enough to touch our home, to stand in the night and make their presence undeniable, and the weight of helplessness pressed down on me. Anna clung to me, sobbing quietly, whispering that she had tried to protect me, that she had hoped silence would shield us both, and I held her as tightly as I could, feeling my own resolve solidify amidst the fear. We could no longer pretend that this was a distant threat. It was here. It was real. And every second we hesitated would give the men more power, more time to strike. I knew then that we had to act decisively, that hiding would not save us, that courage, our courage, would be the only thing that could bring light into the darkness surrounding our lives. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, and yet beneath the fear, a spark of determination grew. We would face this threat, uncover the truth, and protect Anna no matter the cost, even if the storm closing in on us was fiercer than anything we had ever imagined. By the time night fell again, the air in our home was thick with tension, a suffocating mixture of fear, anticipation, and the fragile thread of hope that had been our only anchor through the past days. I had made the decision. We could no longer hide, no longer wait for someone else to save us, because time had already nearly run out. David had arranged for us to meet at a safe location, far enough from prying eyes, where we could plan the final step, gathering undeniable proof of the operation that had threatened our lives. As Anna and I walked through the darkened streets, every shadow seemed alive, every rustle and whisper magnified by fear. Yet we clung to one another, drawing strength from our shared determination, our bond forged in the crucible of these past harrowing days. When we arrived, David was waiting, his figure a dark silhouette against the dim glow of the streetlight, his posture tense, eyes scanning every movement, every flicker of shadow. "This is it," he said quietly, urgency threading his tone. "Once we move tonight, there's no turning back. If we succeed, the threat will be exposed, and you'll finally be safe. If we fail." His words trailed off, but the unspoken truth was clear. Failure meant disaster, perhaps even death. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility press on me like a physical force. Yet beneath the fear, a fierce determination took root. I would not let my daughter face this alone, and I would not let them win. We approached the warehouse, crouched in the shadows, the van pulling into place just as Anna had seen before. Men moving crates with the same practiced precision, unaware of our presence. I raised the camera, every finger trembling, and captured images with painstaking care, the clicks of the shutter echoing in my ears like muted gunshots, yet no one noticed us. My heart raced. Each beat a drum of tension as David whispered directions, guiding our movements, keeping us out of sight, keeping us alive. When the men momentarily left the area to check something deeper inside the warehouse, I motioned to Anna, and we moved quickly, slipping closer to the crates, snapping more photos, recording every detail that could ensure justice would be done. The night air was thick with danger, every sound a potential alarm, but I pushed down panic, focusing only on the mission, on the evidence that could finally break the power of the men who had haunted us for days. With the proof secured, we retreated into the darkness, hearts pounding, adrenaline sharp, every shadow we passed a reminder that discovery could come at any moment. Days later, the fruits of our courage became reality. Authorities beyond the reach of corruption raided the warehouse, confiscated the weapons, and arrested the men behind the operation. The danger that had shadowed our lives evaporated like mist in sunlight, leaving a mixture of relief, disbelief, and lingering fear that such darkness had ever touched our quiet home. Anna and I sat together afterward, our hands entwined, tears mingling with laughter, as we realized that survival had come not through luck, but through unity, courage, and unwavering love. David disappeared soon after, leaving behind only the memory of a stranger who had risked everything to protect my daughter. And I often wonder where he went, whether he found freedom or faded into the shadows he had inhabited for so long. Our lives slowly regained a sense of normalcy, though the echoes of fear and bravery lingered in the corners of our hearts, reminding us that even in ordinary places, danger can hide, and ordinary people can find extraordinary courage. And in the quiet moments, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, I would glance at Anna, remembering how a simple day at church had led us to the brink of terror. And I knew this truth: love, courage, and family are the shields that no darkness, no threat, no secret can ever break. And that's how a simple trip home from church turned into a night of terror, secrets, and courage. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story I have to tell.